All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
I don't know. There's a bunch of gunshots.
A shotgun up there.
A guy with a shotgun?
Yeah, I saw him coming in the door.
Where do we go?
Cormac McSweeney is joining us now on the phone. He's with City News. Cormac, you were there. First of all, how does a guy with a shotgun simply walk into the Parliament building in Ottawa, even though there's a heightened state of alert that was announced by Canadian authorities last week?
Well, the way Parliament Hill is set up, Wolf, is that there are main doors that people can walk up and staff can enter. But it seems like what normally happens is that you have two guards on the front door, and they ask to see your ID. You show them your parliamentary ID, which shows that you have gone through an RCMP background check to make sure that you're not a threat to national security in any way, and that you work on the Hill, and then they let you in. Most of the time we get a lot of tourists who walk into that door, and they're just simply turned away and told to go through the public access door, which has metal detectors and a lot of guards, as well as an X-ray machine. But the staff entrance, which is the main entrance that a lot of Canadians know from a lot of footage of Parliament Hill, is right there. And apparently this gunman walked up, and as he walked into the door, one of the guards was shot immediately in the leg. Another guard, I'm told, the gunman turned towards him, and he dove out of the door to get out of the way. And luckily, that quick action must have saved his life, because after that, the gunman started walking up the stairs. So the security on Parliament Hill, when it comes to people walking in through those front doors, has always been kind of light. I imagine after this, it's going to be much different on Parliament Hill.
So this dead gunman...
Welcome to the X Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and we were listening to a news report about the horrific events that have happened in Ottawa today, or Ottawa, the Canada's capital. The sounds of gunfire through the hallowed halls of Canada's Parliament building were heard today for the first time in the history, in the modern history of this great country I live in and broadcast from, Canada. It started at approximately 9:52 this morning, downtown Ottawa, where a soldier who was on duty as an honor guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier was killed at point-blank range. The suspect got out of the car, walked towards the soldier, raised a rifle, and killed this soldier at point-blank range. The suspect then got into a car, drove up to Parliament Hill, entered the press and MP area, started shooting, was chased by members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Ottawa Police Force, and Parliament Hill Security. And after several minutes, the gunman was finally taken down by the Sergeant-at-Arms of the Canadian Parliament building. Now, the Sergeant-at-Arms is the person in charge of security for the Parliament buildings. He is a 28-year veteran of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And when he heard what was going on, his training kicked in, went back into his office where he picked up his weapon, then without hesitation, took down the suspect. The suspect's name is Michael Zihaf Bibo. Well, that's his Islamic name. His real name is Michael Joseph Hall from Montreal, with an extensive rap sheet for drugs. he has been radicalized. This happening just days after an event in Saint-Jean-sur-la-Richelieu, 15 minutes from where I was raised as a young boy on the south shore of Montreal. Two soldiers were walking along. Two soldiers were involved in a fatal accident where a suspect drove over and killed one of the soldiers. What mainstream media has not reported, and I don't know why, is that the city or the village or the town or the, let's call it a city for now, of Saint-Jean-sur-la-Richelieu is actually where there is the Royal Canadian Military College. Saint-Jean-sur-la-Richelieu is a military town. What are we seeing here? Well, the suspect in the case in Saint-Jean was also radicalized. When I come back from this commercial break, Howard Bloom is joining me, and we'll be talking about horror and terrorism in Canada this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Don't go away.
A bunch of gunshots.
Guy with a shotgun up there.
A guy with a shotgun?
Yeah, I saw him coming in the door.
We're talking about horror and terrorism in Canada today. Canada's national capital, Ottawa. A beautiful city on the banks of the Rideau River. It's ironic because I've been to Ottawa several times. One of our affiliates in Ottawa. To think that this can happen in Canada is something that I don't think very many Canadians have ever thought about. We had our problems during the FLQ crisis in the 60s. But here we are in 2014, finding ourselves that we are at war with ISIL, not only in the Middle East, but right here on the home front. Joining me now to help make some semblance of sanity of this entire situation is Howard Bloom. He is the author of a fascinating book, a book that I call The Rosetta Stone to Terrorism in the Middle East. It's called The Mohammed Code.
It's the Mohammed Code, right? Yeah. You got it.
At www.amazon.com. And Howard, first of all, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And I'd also like to thank CNN for allowing us to use some of their fantastic work and the coverage that they've been doing all day long. Hats off to you guys at CNN. Howard, I didn't see this coming. I really didn't see it coming.
There's good reason not to see it coming. Ottawa has had in the last 2 years 7 murders in 1 year and 9 murders in another year. In other words, the city is so calm it is very difficult to believe that anything of this kind would ever happen. But what Ottawa didn't notice was that off in the Middle East, in September, a call went out via video to the world. And then that call was repeated in a magazine called Dabiq, which came out, the 4th issue of Dabiq just came out in the last 2 weeks. And the call says, and this is from the spokesperson, Dabiq is the official English language magazine of ISIS. And it is designed to recruit English-speaking kids, whether they be in Australia, the United Kingdom, the United States, or Canada. Canada joined the alliance, the coalition against ISIS in the last 2 weeks. And the call from Dabiq and from ISIS spokesperson, who did this both on video and in the pages of the magazine, says, at this point of the crusade against the Islamic State, it is very important that attacks take place in every country that has entered into the alliance against the Islamic State, especially the U.S., the U.K., France, Australia, and Germany. Every Muslim should get out of his house, find a crusader, and kill him. Which means if you believe in the kind of extreme Islam, the jihadist Islam, the violent Islam, that is prevalent among the members of ISIS, whether you live in Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, Dubuque, Denver, New York, L.A., Melbourne, Australia, Sydney, Australia, or London. It is your holy obligation to walk out of your house with a weapon, and when nobody expects it, keep quiet about it. Don't tell your friends about what you're about to do. Those instructions are in the beak also. Go out there and kill somebody before anybody realizes that's what you intend, and that is an instant ticket, an express ticket to paradise. So this is a worldwide call, Rob, and it went out to billions of people. It went out to people, English-speaking people, all over planet Earth, because the goal of jihadists, remember, jihadist Islam is very peculiar. It is not an aberration. It is a main part of Islam because Muhammad himself set an example. He commanded 65 military campaigns. He personally led 27 of them. He killed other people in battle. And he took 317 square miles of territory a day, according to the Universal Sunnah Foundation. And in 628 A.D., we've talked about this before, God sat him down, Allah sat Muhammad down, and opened the scroll of the earth and said, all that is to the west shall be yours, and all that is to the east shall be yours. In other words, God basically gave the entire earth to Muhammad. And that makes sense if you look at things from Muhammad's point of view. After all, God gave Muhammad the only law code that men could live under, and the only law code would take men to paradise instead of hell. So that it became Muhammad's obligation, in his eyes, to liberate every human on the face of the globe, either to kill them if they wouldn't convert, which in fact would shorten their time in hell, would shorten their tortures in hell, or to convert them to the one clear and obvious truth that would take them to paradise, Islam. And that reasoning has been alive now for 1,390 years. What ISIS is doing is not an aberration. It is a gross aberration against the Islam that my friends in the Muslim community believe in. They believe in Muhammad as a prophet of peace. But unfortunately, their belief, which I applaud and I will fight for it to the death, but their belief is ahistorical. It's as inaccurate as when my parents, who were Jewish, used to sit in a service on a Saturday morning, and in front of them were two books, a prayer book and a Bible. And if they had known what was in that Bible, if they had known that that book, that Old Testament, was genocidal, and it is, they would have been horrified. That wasn't their version of Judaism by any stretch of the imagination. That hasn't been part of Judaism for almost 2,000 years. So my Muslim friends who do not believe that Muhammad could possibly have encouraged atrocities, bless them. They are the saviors of the earth. But meanwhile, there is a very strong streak of jihadism that Muhammad himself kicked off. And we're up against, so we're not just up against a temporary aberration. We're up against the continuation of a 1,390-year-long global war. It's not just here in North America. It's not just against English-speaking people. It's been going on against India, China. It's been going on in Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Africa for not just centuries, for over 1,000 years now.
You know, we've been following this story since it first hit the airwaves, and I'd just like to clarify something. I said about the Parliament buildings and the Rideau. It's the Rideau Canal that is near the Parliament buildings, but actually the back of the Parliament buildings faces the Ottawa River. Now, the Ottawa River separates the province of Ontario and Quebec all the way down, and except as it gets closer to the area around Alexandria, this is where the river certainly turns into being 100% of the province of Quebec. So I just like to clarify that. Something else that I find very disturbing is both of these suspects, the suspect that was responsible for the fiasco in Saint-Jean-sur-le-Richelieu, and today's suspect, Michael Zihaf Bibo, were both on the watch list of Canadian law enforcement authorities. Both were known to have wanted to become jihadists. So I'm wondering where or what went wrong that they were able to do what they did if they were in fact being watched by law enforcement.
Well, you're making a very good point, because there are only 90 people on that watch list in Canada. And with only 90 people on a watch list, you would think that these people would be watched. And I'm sure they will be in the future. But you're right. This could have been stopped before it started.
You know, these are very trying times. And what I see, Howard, first of all, this entire attack on Canadian soil has got me really ticked off. I am really ticked off. I feel violated that not only one, but two of these events can happen within days of each other by extremists. These people who have been radicalized, who are now within Canadian sovereign territory and are killing innocent people.
Well, we've got a problem on our hands. It's one humanity has always had on its hands. In fact, it exists in animal populations as well. When kids are making the transition, at the age of roughly 12 to 13 years old, kids start to kick themselves out of their families. And their families start to kick them out a little bit too. And in some societies, Tamarins, for example, the youngsters, when they hit puberty, begin to smell bad to their parents, and the parents begin to smell bad to them. So they try to distance themselves from each other. That happens in human society too. And there's a period of time until you're roughly 29 years old when you're adrift, when you don't feel a part of any social group. There's no social group that has a definite purpose for you, that seems to need you. There's no group of comrades that absolutely holds on to you with warm arms and will never let you go. And when you're in that state, the idea of joining a group that provides you with camaraderie and that provides you with a purpose in your life is very hard to resist. And that's what the propaganda for the Islamic State is counting on, catching people in that moment of life when they are vulnerable. And it's not just a small moment. It's almost 16 years of life when you're vulnerable to those things. One of these two guys was 32 years old. The other one was 25 years old. There's an Australian who has been lured by all of this. And he's 17 years old. He's more typical age. He's now over in Syria. His name is Abdullah Elmir. And he actually, after he arrived in Syria, showed up on a propaganda video in front of a bunch of similar youngsters from all over the world. And he said this, and I say this about your coalition. You threaten us with this coalition of countries. Bring every nation that you wish to us. Bring every nation that you want to come and fight us. It means nothing to us. Well, in fact, I mean, imagine getting a 17-year-old who's just arrived from Australia to get into battle gear and make that statement in front of a bunch of other people who are obviously intent on killing other people and killing to the death. Oh, there goes my... Hang on, well, I got to turn that...
I don't know, that's a real nice tone.
So, at any rate, but that's the kind of thing that's happening. You know the story that over the weekend, 3 girls from a suburb in Denver, a very nice suburb in Denver, were stopped at Frankfurt Airport because they were on their way to join ISIS as wives. Wives, can you imagine what it's like to be a wife in ISIS? You are condemned to cooking and sewing. There's a new website from ISA, it's a new propaganda outlet, and it's specifically for girls, and it's called Al-Zawra, and it teaches you sewing, cooking, software design, and editing and weapons use.
Unreal. Howard, stand by, friend. You and I have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Breaking the news today here in Canada's Canadian soldier killed, at least 3 others wounded. Dead gunman converted to Islam. My name is Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone. Our thoughts and our prayers go out to the family of that soldier who was doing an honor guard in Ottawa, as well as to the other families of all those who were injured. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Canadian soldier killed, at least 3 others wounded. The suspect, Michael Zihaf Bibo, is the suspected gunman who was killed. I love that word in this case. Killed by the Sergeant-at-Arms in Canada's Parliament buildings. 3 I'd also like to take my hat off and salute the members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Ottawa Police Department, the Ontario Provincial Police, the Military Police, and the Parliamentary Police for the great job that they did. Without their professionalism, their training, and their call to duty, I'm sure this would have been a lot worse, but thank you guys. And then I'd also like to say thanks to the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, who, like the members of the CIA, work outside of the jurisdiction of Canada, just like the CIA works outside of the United States, to make sure that the information that can harm Canadians or harm our democratic way of living or our freedom is brought to the proper authorities to be handled with. And guys, once again, hats off to each and every one of you. Howard Bloom's my guest, www.howardbloom.net. He is the author of the Mohammed Code, the Rosetta Stone to what is going on in the Middle East and this terroristic society that we're turning into. It's available on Amazon.com. And Howard, you and I have talked over the years about Egypt, Syria, the West Bank, terrorism. We talked about 9/11. I never thought we'd be talking about terrorism and 2 terrorist attacks in Canada in 1 week.
It seems the least likely place in the world, but there's a strange little detail, and that is that Michael Zahaf Bibeau, original name Michael Joseph Hall, is reportedly the son of Susan Bibeau, who is the deputy chairperson for the Immigration and Refuge Board of Canada. Now, if that fact, which emerged an hour ago, turns out to be accurate, that just shows you during that period of from your puberty until you finally settle down with a mate and a job, how strange that period is, because some kids are good kids and they want to be like their parents, and some kids are bad kids. That's not really a good phrase for it. Some kids turn against their parents and try to be the opposite of what their parents represent, and that's a natural part of those years. That's a natural part of the human exploration process, that we have some kids who adhere to the way that we've always done things and some kids who strike out on their own for different ways of doing things. But in this case, the alternative that is presenting itself in a glossy magazine that's now in its 4th issue, that's Dabiq. That magazine is designed to appeal to kids specifically who have that rogue instinct. And things, we've had previous cultural outlets for that. Rock and roll was a cultural outlet for that. Hippiedom was a cultural outlet for that. The beatnik movement before that was a cultural outlet for those kids who wanted to rebel against their parents. But there is a huge difference between the beatniks, the hippies, rock and rollers, and ISIS. And that is, ISIS wants to kill. And the other movements wanted to allow you to differentiate yourself from your parents without killing.
Something doesn't make sense to me, Howard. How can these people at ISIS come up with this master plan that is working like a well-oiled machine? It's recruiting without having people go to the country of conflict. They are multimedia savvy. Their videos are excellent. They have, well, they're doing a better job at PR than any of the Park Avenue firms could do. How can they do it?
They're accredited by State Department with people with being absolutely the best at propaganda in the entire terrorist world. They do it because they grew up on media. They grew up with the internet. They grew up with Twitter and Facebook. They know how to use these things, but they have an advantage we don't. And it's back in just after 9/11, there was a cover story in the New York Times whose author, I think his name was Paul Berman, tried to point out that Islam, and jihadist Islam in particular, has a powerful and sophisticated philosophy. It offers a meaning to life. It offers an opportunity to feel a part of something bigger than yourself. What could be bigger than bringing God's own form of government to the entire earth and saving all of humanity by allowing it a crack at paradise? There is nothing bigger than that. You're fighting on behalf of God himself. And we in the West don't have a similar transcendent goal to offer. I keep offering as an alternative the fact that we can fight for some very simple facts about the Western way of life. The Western way of life has doubled the human lifespan in 150 years. It increased the salary of the poorest paid worker to a salary equal to that of an entire tenement full of the poorest paid workers 150 years ago. It's increased the average IQ by 35 points. It's increased the factor of peace in the world by a factor of 10, which is absolutely stunning and dramatic. And it's even increased the average height by 4 inches. And it's your obligation and mine, having gotten these privileges from our great-grandparents, to give similar privileges to the great-grandkids who come after us, to give them another 35 IQ points, another 50 years of life, and incomes that are equivalent to an entire apartment buildings full of workers' income today. Those are our sacred obligations, and they do represent something higher than ourselves, because this is a cosmos that is constantly breaking her own rules and creating entirely new possibilities that were inconceivable the minute before. And we're the only creatures capable of doing that. Birds don't do it, ants don't do it, chimpanzees don't do it. We take radical new impossibilities like flight in 1903 with the Wright brothers, or like the cell phone today, and we bring them into existence, things that are utterly startling to this cosmos. And since this is a creative cosmos, we are doing the cosmos' very work. That is a transcendent goal, as far as I'm concerned. But, my voice travels a very short distance. We'd all like to reach much, much bigger audiences, and this message has not reached very many people. Whereas ISIS, hey, they've got a lot of money. Jihadism has been pumped up with money initially by money from Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates, often money from private donors who have huge money from the oil revenues that have come in since 1983 when they jacked the price of oil way up. And now it has its own oil revenues and its own sources of income, and is reputedly able to bring in between, at least before we started hitting its oil facilities, it was bringing in between $4 million and $6 million a day. So it is literally the best financed terrorist organization in modern history. But its people are smart, and they do feel an utter and complete obligation to a higher power and to a cause that's higher than themselves, even if that cause produces between 5,000 and 7,000 women and children who've been taken as sex slaves in just one town, the town the Yazidis lived in. And even though their magazine says they plan that for every country in the world, they plan to take sex slaves by the tens of millions. And to them, that is a noble purpose.
They're sick.
Well, by our standards, they're sick, but every sanity is relative. We're sane only with relationship to the worldview, the logical system of the people with whom we share a common culture. This is a very different culture, and it's been around, as I said, for 1,390 years. So there's a sanity to it. There's a sanity that's made it a winner on the world stage. Go ahead.
Now, I was just going to ask you, Howard, to your knowledge, has there been any movement in the Soviet Union or Russia by ISIS?
Yes. Not by ISIS itself, but jihadism has been a big deal in Russia since the 1990s. In the 1990s, the jihadists started blowing up apartment buildings in Moscow and killed as many as 200 people at a time. They took the Dubrova Theater over with 1,000 people in it and held those 1,000 people hostage, and over 300 of those people died. There was the Beslan school crisis, where over 350 people died. Now, these people are all, right now, the Kavkaz Center, which is the leading spokes body for the Islamic states, for the jihadist movements of the Islamic states that sort of hang below Russia like a belt. There are 9 of these Islamic states. And the Kavkaz movement has shoved ISIS away. It says that ISIS is not legitimate. Well, that's only going to last so long. If ISIS continues racking up victories, even those jihadist elements are going to collapse to ISIS. You know that 2 weeks ago, the first fighter from Xinjiang, there's a province in China, the far western province of China. It's the Xinjiang province. It is the size of all of Western Europe, Rob. It's huge. And its population is a Muslim population. And in that Muslim population, there have been terrorist acts taking place for a long time. The Chinese call them terrorist acts and try to point out that they're part of a jihadist movement, and we deny that just because the Chinese are our enemies, our rivals. We're crazy. And the first Xinjiang fighter was found among the folks of ISIS 2 weeks ago. And in fact, right now, what China is doing, it is focusing on a set of trials for a bunch of these Xinjiang activists who've created mayhem, and it is pointing out that a leader that it killed recently was preaching an Islamic State. So, and right now, ISIS has shown its appeal. It has followers in Afghanistan. It has followers in Pakistan. It has followers in Somalia and the Sudan. It has folks who preach their allegiance to it in Algeria. I've never seen a group of fragmented jihadist groups turn to a central leader and acknowledge it as the leader with such rapidity in my entire lifetime.
You and I discussed several weeks ago I brought the subject up about all these inmates in federal and provincial and jails throughout the United States and Canada that get converted to Islam behind bars.
Yes, and that's a process that's been going on for almost 40 years, possibly even longer. And there's a basic message that you have to understand that Islam is getting across to prisoners. It basically says to them, today you are the prisoners, today you are called the criminals, but someday you will rise up. And when you rise up, because you are the only ones who believe in Islam, you will be the masters, and those who put you in jail will be your slaves and servants. That's a very compelling message. So in essence, what Islam has been doing has been planting sleepers. Now, that sounds like a crazy thing to say. Islam is planting sleepers. But what about these girls in Denver? Yep. They hadn't been born when jihadism raised its modern head. But jihadism was designed with them in mind. It was one of the things about jihadism and Islam in general that we don't have and we should have is Islam takes a multi-generational approach. One of the great examples is the taking of Constantinople. In the Hadith, the holy books of Islam, it was predicted that Constantinople, the new Rome, would fall to Islam. Well, indeed, the Roman Empire, that is the empire controlled by Byzantium, fell within a very short amount of time, roughly 10 years after Muhammad's death, to the Muslims. But they couldn't get Constantinople. But they hung in there. They stuck to it. They besieged that city for the next 700 years. And in fact, in 1453, after many, many, many generations of patience, they finally got Constantinople. Today it's known as Istanbul. But this is why we have to stop them in towns like Kobani. This is why we have to stop them in the Anbar province. This is why we have to absolutely guarantee they do not take Baghdad, because every victory is a sign that God is on their side. And folks, group psychology, it's a major field in the psychological sciences, has shown over and over again that people are attracted to winners and they shun losers. For example, when your sports team wins, you say, we won. Yeah. When your sports team loses, you say, they lost. And ISIS is counting on victory after victory after victory to make as many people as possible say we rather than them. We need to do the opposite. We need to make sure they experience defeat after defeat after defeat, and people think of us as we, not them.
How is this going to play out in the theater in Syria? What happened today in Ottawa? What happened with the three young girls that were stopped by the Germans from becoming ISIL brides? Is this going to change anything? Or is it going to take something much more catastrophic before the leaders of the world will say, all right, we need to get boots on the ground and we need to eradicate them from point A to point Z?
Well, the boots on the ground are the boots of Bashar Assad's Syria, and they have shown that they can take these people on and fight them to a standstill, and possibly if they had our help, they can do better than that. And there is the lesson of the dictators. We encouraged the toppling of 5 dictators, and in almost every single one of those cases, we didn't get democracy and freedom of speech and tolerance the way we thought we would. Instead, we got intolerance and even more jihadism, even more forces that are favorable to ISIS. In fact, that's how we got ISIS, is by believing a bunch of phony messages about weapons of mass destruction that came from Iran and going in and toppling Saddam Hussein. And what did we get? We got ISIS. So there's one dictator left. What we should have learned by now is that these dictators, they run a better government, they produce more freedom for women, they produce a higher level of education, they produce a higher level of medical care, and they are more secular than ISIS by a long shot. And they're the only thing that can stop the gap, that can keep ISIS from going further. Turkey is dreaming about the fall of Bashar Assad. That's what it wants us to work on, is forget about ISIS as far as they're concerned, just concentrate on getting rid of Bashar Assad. But what will happen if we get rid of Bashar Assad? We'll have another Iraq. We'll have another Libya. We'll have an open battleground in which ISIS can take over. And if Erdogan, seriously, the Prime Minister of Turkey, Tayyip Erdogan, seriously thinks that we should get rid of Bashar Assad, he's got to realize that after they get rid of Bashir, the next person they'll get rid of, that is the next person ISIS will get rid of, is him.
You and I have to take our final break, my friend. Please stand by. Great having you with us tonight, Howard. Exonation, my guest this hour is Howard Bloom, www.howardbloom.net. He's the author of The Mohammed Code, a book that I call the Rosetta Stone to understanding the state of terrorism and the Middle East this very day. It's available at Amazon.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we wrap up this hour. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Howard Bloom is my special guest. Howard and I have been talking about the events that happened earlier this morning in Canada's capital, Ottawa, where a gunman killed a Canadian soldier who was doing an honor guard at which is basically our Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Ottawa, and also wounded 3 other people. The gunman was downed by the Sergeant-at-Arms in Canada's Parliament buildings. And there are still conflicting stories whether there's one gunman or 2. There was a witness who was at the area where the gunman gained access into Canada's Parliament building who said that 2 men went into the building, one with a rifle, one with a shotgun, and they were dark-skinned and looked as if they were from the Middle East. So that's where it stands right now. Portions of Parliament Hill are still locked down. Authorities and law enforcement officials are starting to unlock other areas. And once again, my hat's off to the members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, CSIS, the Ottawa Police Force, the Ontario Provincial Police, and of course Parliament Security and all other law enforcement agencies and the first responders who worked on this case today. Howard, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Let's talk about Not in My Name.
Okay, Not in My Name is a campaign by a lot of mainstream Muslim groups from all over the world. And the campaign is oriented toward telling people this is not, what ISIS represents is not legitimate Islam, that it goes against everything that these major groups believe that Islam is really all about. And it's a Twitter campaign. It's got a pound sign followed by Not in My Name, and it's something worth supporting. But on the negative side,
yes,
today there's something else happened that nobody paid any attention to. There's a woman named Asia Bibi in Pakistan. She's a Christian woman who was sentenced to death for blasphemy, and she had an appeal in front of the judges, and the judges denied her appeal today, a death sentence. And her blasphemy came about because she was having a dispute with some Muslim neighbors. Remember, she's a Christian. She drank from a cup that belonged to the 2 of them, and they said she should not be drinking from that cup because she's not a Muslim, which shows you what a second-class rank is like, and everybody who's not a Muslim has a second-class rank in a Muslim country. And they got into an argument, and they accused her of blasphemy. 4 years ago, The head of the Punjab province, the governor of the Punjab province, Salman Taseer, went to support her in jail. He was shot by his guard, and the guard who shot him was showered with rose petals by judges. The judges do not dare let her go, because if they do, they know they will be shot. That is not the kind of country you and I want to live in. ISIS must be defeated. And even Pakistan, remember, is a nuclear country, has nuclear weapons.
That is scary. That is really scary. Howard, once again, thank you so much for coming on in such short notice. I appreciate you when you come on the air. I appreciate your insight. And where do you think it'll go from here?
Well, we have to be resolute and firm. We cannot be intimidated by false phrases or false words like Islamophobia. I'm sorry. Sometimes even a paranoid person is right. Paranoid fantasies sometimes can reflect reality. We have to be resolute and firm in supporting our values, which are freedom of speech, tolerance, pluralism, creativity.
Howard, take care of yourself, my good friend. And Exonation, if you'd like to get a copy of Howard's book, The Mohammed Code, it's available at Amazon.com, and his website is www.howardbloom.net. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. You can listen to the X Zone 724-365 at www.xzoneradiotv.com or by calling 213-401-0080. I'm Rob McConnell. I'll be back. Don't go away.